Hey everyone, I get asked relatively recently, or frequently I should say, what are the things I'm secretly worried about that are going to happen to Bitcoin, and what could go wrong, and how could it go off the rails, and what dangers do I see lurking, and questions like that. And the answer is none. Like, honestly, none. And obviously when people ask me, no, but like, what are you like secretly really worried about? I'm like, no, I'm really not worried about anything bad happening to Bitcoin. And the reasons are because I've researched every bad thing that could happen to Bitcoin that could, cause it to not reach its full potential. And I just don't think any of those are going to happen. But I wanted to recap the 9 things that I covered in an earlier video back, I think it was in March 9 or March 13 or something like that of this year. I did a video entitled The Bad Things That Could Happen to Bitcoin. Which is why I used a similar title in this video. And I'm going to recap how much progress we've really made since March and how really, much better position we are in today, even than back in March of 2024. Okay, so the number one thing was the government will ban it. Well, we're way farther away from that. Back in March, I said, not going to happen. The ETFs, the exchange traded funds were approved, and therefore we're, way past that ever being a possibility. Not only that, now we are way past that being a possibility, and we have a pro-Bitcoin president and a pro-Bitcoin Congress in the United States, which obviously happened since March. So from a probability that Bitcoin will somehow get banned, we are in a better position than we've ever been in all of human history. Second, the government will regulate it to the degree that it is unusable. Again, we are in a much better position from a regulatory perspective now than we were back in March, with a pro-Bitcoin president, a pro-Bitcoin Congress, and regulations related to Bitcoin loosening around the world rather than getting more onerous. And so from a regulatory perspective, we're actually in a better place than we were back in March and trending in the right direction worldwide. Number 3, that there would be some sort of massive security breach. There has not been any sort of massive security breach. And with every passing day, Bitcoin is almost 16 years old now. And with every passing day that there's not some sort of hack or security breach, the probability that there will ever be one goes down, because the more time passes that something stays running, the more likely it is that it will stay running. Same with the internet. The internet, depending on how you count it, is, 50, 40, 50 years old at this point, back, depending on whether you count the start in the 1960s or the 1980s. But regardless of when you count the start of it, most people would say, yeah, there's not going to be some massive hack that takes down the whole internet, because if that was a thing, it would have happened already. And if it becomes a thing, they'll fix it. Well, Bitcoin's in the same position at 16 years old. There's just really nothing that could happen to Bitcoin that's going to take the whole thing down. And just like the internet, if something somehow emerged, they would just fix it, because that's what you do with technology. Okay, so number 4, other major technology issues. Again, the Bitcoin ecosystem is stronger and better today than it was back in March. So we're in a better position rather than a worse position as compared to March. And so, again, we're even farther away from some other, sort of technology issue being an issue. Number 5, quantum computing as a way to hack the Bitcoin network. Again, people have been talking about quantum computers for 20 years now or longer. Nothing has emerged that is meaningful. And I can assure you, if quantum computers became an issue, that the security protocols within Bitcoin would be the very first things that got fixed and were made quantum computing proof, because Bitcoin has the best developers in the entire world and $2 trillion of value to protect on the Bitcoin network. And so I'm just totally not worried about that, because again, it's going to get fixed decades before it's a problem. If it turns out that quantum computers are somehow going to hack, Bitcoin's security in some way. And of course, if they do somehow hack Bitcoin's security in some way, that of course means that they have already hacked all of your bank accounts, all of your websites, and everything else that could possibly be hacked, because Bitcoin is way more secure than any of that. And if quantum computers could somehow be used to maliciously attack Bitcoin, that means everything else has already been hacked first, since Bitcoin is more secure than any of that other stuff. But even so, not only do I think Bitcoin would be the last thing to be impacted, it will also be the first thing to be fixed and upgraded. And if it looks like a threat like that is emerging, which I just don't see happening at all. All right, number 6. market volatility. The market is significantly less volatile than it used to be. Even now, it is much less volatile than it was earlier this year. So prior to the Bitcoin ETF approvals in January, Bitcoin was a lot more volatile than it is now. And I think the same will continue to be true, that the volatility has largely been to the upside, which is what you want. Nobody complains about the volatility of something going up and down if it's going mostly up. And I think the volatility of anything goes down over time, and Bitcoin has radically reduced its volatility over the last 16 years, and that continues to be a trend, especially now that the Bitcoin exchange traded funds and all of that are coming online. Are not just online, they've set records in every conceivable category for how fast a Bitcoin exchange traded fund has come to the market and amassed assets under management and all that. They've broken every record. So those are going strong. There's option markets for Bitcoin now. Just the whole ecosystem is all the things that dampen volatility by causing there to be a sort of a greater demand for the asset, and therefore a greater, more opportunities for people to buy up dips and that sort of thing. It's just stronger and more robust than it was even back in March. Number 7, scalability. The Bitcoin Lightning Network, which is the payments network built on top of Bitcoin, continues to set records as far as liquidity and the ability to buy stuff with Bitcoin. With Lightning, we are still years away from most people buying most things with Bitcoin. Of course, I buy everything with the Bitcoin, the Coinbase Bitcoin debit card, which is just called the Coinbase debit card. I buy everything, so I'm already using Bitcoin to buy everything I buy. But as far as average people using straight up Bitcoin without the need for Coinbase and without the need for the Visa network to facilitate it, we're still years away from that being the average thing an average person does on a daily basis. But all of that technology is getting more mature by the day and stronger and better and all of that by the day. Environmental impact, number 8. Since the Bitcoin, since I did the video back in March of this year, we went through the halving on April 19, which chopped the total amount of Bitcoin issued every 10 minutes in half, from 6.25 Bitcoin down to 3.125 Bitcoin. As a result, the Bitcoin miners that secure and audit the Bitcoin network, they are continuing to grow, but not at the same sort of insane pace that was freaking everybody out, that they're going to somehow use all the electricity in the world. And for what it's worth, you can go find research reports back from 2017 that forecast that by the year 2020, the Bitcoin miners will use all the electricity in the world. Obviously, we're sitting here in 2024, 4 years past that date, and Bitcoin's still using perhaps 1/10 of 1% of the world's electricity, a tiny fraction, and certainly not all, which was what the scaremongers who write the news headlines would have led us to believe back in 2017. And of course, nobody believed them back then because it was ridiculous. But anyway, we're in a better spot that way because I rarely see news headlines with that concern. And in addition to that, since March of this year, a lot of people have figured out that Bitcoin is actually super valuable for regulating the power grid and serving as a source of demand for building out new renewable electrical grids. That's a huge problem with electrical grids, is that there's not something to use up the excess power before they get the demand for that power up and running around them. So if you build a big nuclear, or whether it's nuclear power, wind power, solar power, the question is who's going to use the power when the industry and the neighborhoods around it are not using that power. And if you're not using it, you can't justify building it out. But in the case of Bitcoin, Bitcoin is always ready to use any available power, especially stranded power and unused power. So, but anyway, the total number of news headlines that are negative related to Bitcoin as compared to positive have shifted significantly in favor of the positive side since March of this year. Part of that is due to the halving, which has just made it more competitive for Bitcoin miners, which means there's just, less people paying attention to how much total Bitcoin mining is happening because they've got to operate more efficiently and they're not expanding quite as fast as they were. And part of that is just due to people waking up and realizing that Bitcoin is actually good for the environment and for electrical usage. And, electrical usage is a good thing. It means human productivity. Every developed country in the world uses a lot of electricity. There is no such thing as a rich country, that uses not much power. Like, that doesn't exist. There are poor countries that use not much power, and there are rich countries that use a lot of power, and there's nothing in between. There's no reverse of that. So as a result of that, I am not concerned about power usage anyway. The way to become wealthy is to generate more power, not to use less. And but regardless, for those who are concerned about that, back in March of this year, those headlines have largely mostly gone away at this point. And then the last is network attacks, that somehow someone would mess with the Bitcoin network in a way that made it harder to use. Again, we have not seen that happen. You can still transact an unlimited amount of value on the Bitcoin network for less than $1. And for payments that are small, you can use the Bitcoin Lightning Network and things like that. So, in summary, none of any of the bad things I mentioned in March, none of them have come to fruition. But not only that, all of them are trending in an even more favorable direction than I would have anticipated even back in March of this year. Everything's on track. The price is higher than many people thought it was going to be at this point, at about $97,000 per Bitcoin. And everything's right on track. It's just beautifully growing and thriving exactly the way you would expect Bitcoin to do if it were the future monetary system of the world, which I believe it is. And it's right on track to be that. And it'll take a couple more decades before nobody else uses any other kind of money. But in the interim, there's still huge upside. I think the minimum price for Bitcoin is at least $1 million per coin. And it will likely go a lot higher than that, but we don't know. But I think at a minimum, it gets at least to the $1 million per coin ballpark. And if you got any other questions, keep them coming. I love answering questions and helping you in any possible way I can on your Bitcoin journey. Thanks, everyone.